two perfect couples.
They did family vacations. They would go camping. We'd go to Six Flags or we'd go out to eat.
But a devastating crime would tear the four friends apart.
To see all the blood and the evidence left behind, you knew right then there'd been a fight, a pretty good scuffle that went on.
The resulting investigation would send the congregation reeling.
Most of them had absolutely no idea there was an affair going on.
And the search for answers would leave police wondering, just how many commandments did one person violate? Early morning, July 5th, 2004. It was still dark when a delivery driver pulled into the parking lot at the Frito-Lay distribution center in Rome, Georgia.
He's fixing to come load his Frito-Lay truck to go on his route.
While he's in the parking lot, I think he's just getting some stuff together before he gets out of the car, he sees a man step out of the office.
Someone at the office that early in the morning wasn't unusual, but the fact that the driver didn't recognize the man was.
It was not really a facility that was open to the public. It was just where the drivers came and loaded and unloaded product.
Even more suspicious, the stranger silhouetted in the doorway appeared nervous.
That man stops, looks around, stands there for just a few seconds.
Whether he'd noticed the delivery man sitting in his parked car or not, the stranger made a hasty exit.
The witness watches the guy walk over to this burgundy minivan, and he opens the car door, and when he does, the light comes on inside the van, and then he watches the guy take his shirt off and pull it over his head.
Once he'd stripped off his shirt, the stranger started the minivan and drove away, leaving the witness to wonder what was going on inside the Frito-Lay office.
He went and checked the office and discovered the victim in this case.
It was the distribution center's district manager, Thad Reynolds, slumped on the floor in a pool of blood.
His supervisor has been attacked, and he calls 911.
Police and EMTs were on the scene within minutes, but it was no use. Thad Reynolds was already dead.
There were 19 different stab wounds.
To see all the blood and the evidence left behind, you knew right then that there'd been a fight, a pretty good scuffle that went on.
Thad's death sent shockwaves through the close-knit Southern community, particularly his church, Hollywood Baptist.
This church in particular was a very larger church in a smaller community. A lot of people here, everybody knows everybody.
And everybody at Hollywood Baptist knew Thad Reynolds and his wife, Michelle.
Thad and Michelle, just looking at them, they were the perfect couple.
She was the beautiful blonde mother of four.
She was just a very likable, very pretty person.
He was a dedicated father and a devout Christian.
He loved the Lord and could, you know, always make your day better.
People that were not doing well or they needed guidance, he would be there.
We lost one of the godliest men you could ever want to meet.
Thad's murder was bad enough, but the parishioners at Hollywood Baptist would receive another blow when they discovered the sin that led to it. As small-town Georgia teenagers in the 1980s, Michelle Sullins and Thad Reynolds were the quintessential high school sweethearts.
Michelle was very popular in high school. She was the homecoming queen.
He was popular, played football, was into sports.
They married in 1987, just after graduation.
He went to work for Curtis Meat. He drove a truck.
Michelle got a job working as an administrative assistant, but gave it up when she gave birth to a daughter in 1992.
When she started having children, they had made the decision that she would be a stay-at-home mom.
But just as Thad and Michelle's small-town romance appeared on the fast track to a happy ending, things suddenly derailed. In 1995, after almost 7 years of marriage, Michelle told Thad she wanted a divorce.
She wasn't happy just being a mom and a wife.
She made the comment to this pastor from the church, "You place your wife on a pedestal, but Thad never put me on a pedestal."
Thad agreed to the divorce, but he immediately regretted it, especially for the effect it might have on his daughter.
He was never more miserable in his life. He didn't believe in divorce. He did not believe in broken homes.
Determined to get Michelle back, Thad Reynolds turned to the church he'd attended since childhood, Hollywood Baptist.
It was a very close-knit congregation, a community of people that took their faith and religion very seriously.
Thad asked the members of the church to pray for him and Michelle Reynolds to get back together.
He had several people praying that they get back together because he just wanted her back so bad.
Whether it was the prayers or Thad's persistent courtship, Michelle eventually had a change of heart. 2 years after they had divorced, the couple remarried in 1997.
Thad and Michelle had a wedding in the church on a Sunday morning. That was our church ceremony.
And this time it looked like the marriage would last. The couple built a new home and quickly filled it.
Everything was going good. I mean, they built the new house next to my parents and had 3 more children.
A beautiful home and a growing family. Thad and Michelle's divorce appeared to be well behind them.
They just seemed to be in love. They just seemed to be the absolute perfect family whenever you would see them.
They called them Barbie and Ken because that's the way their life seemed to be going.
Thad's career thrived too. After hiring on at Frito-Lay, he worked his way up to district manager.
He started out driving the beat-up Frito-Lay pickup truck, the oldest one they had, and just moved up.
I didn't know of them wanting for anything. They had a fairly nice lifestyle.
Thad and Michelle entered their 30s as pillars of their small-town community, comfortably middle class, raising a family and active in their church.
Thad and Michelle worked with the group New Generation, which was kids, and they did songs and acted out skits and went to several different places putting on the shows.
Thad also sang in the choir and served as a deacon.
He also did marriage counseling.
He'd be, there if you needed him. If you had a problem, you could always go to him.
Between the children's ministry, deacon duties, marriage counseling, and couples retreats, the church dominated Thad and Michelle's free time.
There were a number of couples in the church that would do things every weekend together. They were close friends.
The Reynolds worked closely with the church's youth minister, Scott Harper. Like the Reynolds, Scott and his wife Paige had young daughters, and the two families soon became inseparable.
Anytime you seen one, it wasn't far behind. Here comes the other family. I mean, it was always them two couples.
Thad quickly became best friends with Scott, who also worked as an IT specialist at a local hospital. And as two stay-at-home moms with busy husbands, Michelle Reynolds and Paige Harper became close too.
Michelle and I became best friends. She was like a sister to me. Our birthdays were just days apart, so many years for our birthday, we all four celebrated together. We'd go to Six Flags or we'd go out to eat.
Good friends, a beautiful family, and a seemingly strong marriage. Thad and Michelle appeared truly blessed. And Thad wanted to show his gratitude by giving back. One Sunday in the spring of 2004, he stood up in front of the congregation of Hollywood Baptist and made an announcement. He was joining the ministry.
He felt like that God was calling him to be a minister.
But did Michelle want to be a minister's wife? There were signs that she might want a little time away from Thad. In June of 2004, she signed up to help the Harpers chaperone a church youth retreat. At the last minute, she called Paige with a change of plan.
Michelle called me to tell me that she was getting her own room. She was not going to chaperone with me because she just needed her time.
She wasn't going to be in a room with a whole bunch of kids, and she was the only person who had a room by herself.
And Michelle continued to keep to herself, even when she was around her best friend.
Michelle was very distant from me. She would not acknowledge me if I spoke to her, would not look me in the eye. Was just very different.
Michelle's behavior was so different, in fact, that Paige became concerned.
I said, Michelle, is there something wrong? Have I done something to offend you? And she just looked me in the eye and she said, no, I just want to be around people who are on fire for God.
Paige was stung by the rebuke.
It was very odd because we all worshiped together every Sunday. I was just as active in the church as they all were, and felt closer to God than I had ever felt.
As puzzling as Michelle's remark was, it was soon clear who she thought was on fire for God. As her husband Thad prepared for the ministry, Michelle became closer than ever with Hollywood Baptist's current associate pastor, Scott Harper.
She would continually ask him for assistance about how to do different things with the kids at their church. She started asking him more and more and more for his assistance, and they started exchanging emails, talking constantly.
Saturday, July 3rd, 2004 was the start of a big holiday weekend in Rome, Georgia.
The county puts on a display of fireworks every year down by the river.
Predictably, the Reynolds and Harper families met up for the fireworks. On Sunday, July 4th, they met again at church.
We all decided we would meet at Ridge Ferry Park that afternoon and just kind of hang out and, you know, have snacks and play volleyball and stuff like that and just enjoy the evening together.
Michelle certainly appeared to enjoy herself.
I noticed her being kind of flirtatious with other men, asking somebody to help her, show her how to throw a football and stuff like that.
She was a little too flirty, wanting other men to pay attention to her.
But after a little playful flirting at the picnic, Michelle and her husband loaded up their 4 children and they all headed home.
They probably had a good evening at home together. I know that he said goodnight to the children and did the normal things that a father would do.
The next morning, Thad was up well before sunrise. Michelle and the kids were still asleep when he left for work.
He always joked with me about the reason he worked so hard is so they wouldn't have to. And, you know, he started early in the morning so he could get home in the evenings and spend time with them.
Thad had only been at the office at Frito-Lay a few minutes that morning when a man in a burgundy minivan pulled into the parking lot.
He parks right in front by the front door of the office. He gets out of the car, goes inside.
Minutes later, the man would get back in his minivan and drive away. And Thad Reynolds would be dead. Coming up, did Thad and Michelle's picture-perfect marriage mask a sinful secret?
They were flirting, you know, lover chit-chat, if you will.
July 5th, 2004. It was a slow post-holiday Monday for most of Rome, Georgia. But the Floyd County Police were busy. They had just received a call from the Frito-Lay distribution center on the edge of town. A delivery driver who worked at the center had just found his supervisor, 36-year-old Thad Reynolds, dead in the distribution center's office.
It was clear that he had been in the office and working. Based on the disarray of the office, it was clear that there had been a struggle.
There was a bloody fight, maybe starting outside the office and going on into the office.
In the course of the struggle, Thad Reynolds had been repeatedly stabbed.
There are different wounds all over his body, including defensive wounds.
But who would launch a deadly attack on the well-known church deacon?
They had a witness who saw a man drive away in a minivan.
The witness, the same Frito-Lay driver who had found Thad's body, told police he didn't get a clear look at the man's face or the minivan's license plate. But clues at the scene appeared to both confirm that he had seen the killer and that Thad had managed to wound his attacker.
There was a larger amount of blood at the doorway, which matched up with the witness's testimony that the man had come out the door and stopped for a moment.
This was not a master criminal at work. There was a lot of evidence left around.
At the crime scene, police found the empty sheath from a hunting knife, presumably the murder weapon. They also found a pair of prescription eyeglasses, which fit with the witness's account of the stranger stripping off his shirt before driving away.
When he did that, he had prescription glasses on, and the glasses came off of the top of his head or off of his face, and they landed on the ground.
Tracking down the prescription could help police identify the killer. But first came the grim process of confirming Thad's identity and notifying his family.
The pastor of the church was called upon to make the identification.
A well-known and popular deacon was dead. To help deal with the devastating news, the pastor of Hollywood Baptist quickly summoned reinforcements. His associate pastor and one of Thad's closest friends.
One of the first people that he went to break the news to was Scott Harper.
Scott immediately placed a call to Paige.
Got a phone call from Scotty to tell me that Thad had been murdered. At that point, my first reaction was, I need to get to Michelle, because she's not going to be okay. Scotty told me to stop by the hospital and pick him up, and we would go from there to her house.
When Paige picked up her husband minutes later, he appeared shaken.
Scotty's just like, what do you say? What do you say to somebody, at a time like this?
By the time the Harpers arrived at Michelle's house, their pastor was already there.
The way that she was officially notified is her pastor at Hollywood Baptist came and told her.
Michelle took the news stoically, according to the family and friends who flocked to her side.
When I first went in the house, you would think she would get up and hug me and cry, or she didn't. It wasn't anything like that.
She was in shock, just very distant. I never saw her break down and cry.
Even Thad's mother noticed her daughter-in-law's odd behavior.
She had just bought a black dress like 2 weeks before and made the comment, whoever thought I would be using it for this.
Was she simply in shock, or was there another explanation? Back at the crime scene, the investigators were starting to wonder. Thad's death didn't strike them as a random robbery.
What would you get for robbing a guy at a Frito-Lay warehouse other than a bunch of Doritos and the cash that he may have on him?
And Thad's killer hadn't even taken that much.
His keys, his wallet, his cell phone, all of those things were still in the office.
Instead of a robbery, it appeared that the stranger in the burgundy van had come to Frito-Lay for one reason only: to kill Thad Reynolds.
Police officers will always say that stabbings are a very personal crime, that somebody has to be very angry at somebody else to stab them, especially repeatedly. This was probably not a random act of violence, that somebody had some personal vendetta against Thad Reynolds.
But who? A clue to the killer's identity came that same evening after the 6 o'clock news. Thad's murder and the hunt for the man in the burgundy minivan were the top stories.
The news reporter said that, anybody with any information about the vehicle description that they gave, they would like to, contact the Floyd County Police Department.
Scott Roberts, who worked with Scott Harper at Floyd County Medical Center, heard the victim's name and immediately reached for the phone.
He couldn't believe it, because he knew Thad Reynolds was friends with his supervisor, Scott Harper, that they attended the same church together.
And that wasn't all he knew about Scott Harper.
I knew Scott Harper drove a burgundy minivan.
Floyd County Police asked Roberts to come into the station and give them a statement.
Monday night, the Floyd County Police are taking a statement from this witness who has already alerted them to Scott Harper's possible involvement.
And the witness based his suspicion of Scott on more than just the minivan.
He also knew that Scott Harper was having an affair with someone.
According to Roberts, he'd innocently stumbled upon the information at work.
His job was to fix things that were wrong with the phone lines, to tap into those lines and try to correct those problems. As a result, he would inadvertently, or sort of inadvertently, overhear portions of conversations.
And a few weeks before the murder, he'd accidentally overheard Scott talking to a woman who wasn't his wife.
He recalled Scott Harper making phone calls to a woman that this gentleman could understand was not his wife. He remembered that her name was Michelle.
They were flirting, lover chit-chat, if you will. It kind of reminded me of, high school sweethearts.
Finally, the detectives wrapped up their questioning of Roberts with a seemingly innocent question. Did Scott wear glasses?
I said, yes, he did. Described some wireframe glasses.
The van, the glasses, and a possible affair. Was Scott Harper simply a jealous lover? Or was Michelle somehow involved in her husband's death? Either way, Scott Harper moved to the top of the suspect list.
There was a lot more going on under the surface than anybody realized.
That Monday, however, Scott Harper's wife, Paige, had started to notice a few little things, even if she didn't yet realize their full implication.
His glasses were missing. Scotty would lose them a lot of times, so I didn't think a whole lot about that.
She also noticed a new bandage on his hand.
It was his index and his middle finger. They were bandaged up together.
I did ask, I was like, well, what happened to your hand? And he said, well, I heard it at the gym yesterday morning lifting weights.
When the Harpers were brought in for questioning on Wednesday, July 7th, Scott gave police a similar story.
They first questioned us both together, then questioned me, and then questioned Scotty.
He told the police that he had been lifting weights.
That seemed to explain the bandage on his hand. But what about his glasses? Police didn't reveal what they'd recovered from the crime scene, but they did ask Scott some pointed questions.
He asked him some specific questions about where his glasses were. He told him he'd lost them.
And when pressed further by the detective, Scott adamantly denied having an affair.
He specifically asked him if he was having an affair with Michelle Reynolds, and he said no.
The police let Scott go, but that didn't mean they believed him. In fact, adding up the little things she'd noticed the morning of Thad's murder, even his wife was starting to have doubts.
When we left the detective's office and we were in the car together, I said, do you know anything about Thad's murder? What's going on? And he said, do you realize what you're asking me?
Coming up, a search of Scott's computer raises even more questions about Michelle.
Scott Harper sent her an email that reads, "Stop me if you have any hesitations."
On July 7, 2004, the Floyd County, Georgia police spent the evening combing through emails recovered from the county hospital computer server. Scott Harper, the hospital's IT supervisor, was close friends with Thad Reynolds and his wife, Michelle. And now, less than 48 hours after Reynolds had been found stabbed to death, a witness had placed Harper at the top of the suspect list.
He calls the authorities and tells them that he knows Scott Harper, that he may be having an affair.
He didn't know exactly who, but he knew he was having an affair with someone.
The witness had overheard Scott flirting on the phone with a woman named Michelle. But was her last name Reynolds? Rather than bringing the dead man's wife in for questioning and accusing her of an affair, the police hoped to find confirmation without the risk of upsetting an innocent widow. Therefore, they had come to the hospital with a warrant to search Scott Harper's computer, in particular, his emails.
They were saved to the hospital server, so they were very easy for his boss, who is the head of the department, to retrieve for us.
A large number of the emails were to and from Michelle Reynolds, but at first, the discussions appeared routine, mostly revolving around the youth group Michelle ran at the church.
She started asking him more and more and more for his assistance, and they started exchanging emails, talking constantly.
Then, about a month before Thad's murder, the tone of the emails changed, starting with an email from Michelle.
She's definitely coming on to him in the emails. Some of it is in the guise of, I know I shouldn't feel this way, and he absolutely falls for it.
Scott, based on the subsequent emails, clearly harbored similar thoughts.
The emails, toward the end especially, were very graphic.
She sent him the Wheel of Fortune email. He had to fill in the words that told what she wanted to do to him. And then he wrote her an email back in even more graphic detail what he wanted to do to her.
When they actually consummated the affair wasn't entirely clear. But during the youth retreat in June, the emails showed that not only had Scott known that Michelle was getting her own room, he actually booked her room himself and then shared it.
Scotty's in the room with another fellow chaperone, the boys, and during that time, that night, Scotty gets up and leaves that room and is gone for the entire night and does not come back till the next morning.
He was going down to Michelle Reynolds' room. So even while they were on a church trip with his wife as a chaperone and her daughter there as a participant, they continued their affair.
But had Michelle likewise manipulated her lover into committing murder? That night, as police pored over the reams of email between the lovers, the answer was anything but clear.
She was very careful what she said to him, what she emailed him. She was very careful to walk right up to the line.
Michelle never said, "I need you to kill my husband."
Not in those words, at least.
She would say, "You're going to have to live longer than Thad if we're going to be together, because he'll never agree to a divorce."
And she knew from experience.
When they got a divorce the first time, Thad pursued her. He had the whole church praying that they would get back together because he felt like they were meant to be together. He was not going to give up easy at all.
The search history of Scott's computer suggested he had taken the hint when Michelle told her lover he was going to have to live longer than her husband.
He had looked up online about poisons and arsenic and different types of poisons, and even an essay about how to commit the perfect murder.
Whatever he may have found, he didn't discuss it with Michelle via email.
I can show he's looking that up, but I can't show that he's telling her he did it.
Then, just hours before Thad's death, the lovers had exchanged a last round of emails on the evening of July 4th.
The night before, she even tells him what Thad's schedule is going to be the next morning. Specific direction, where he's going to be.
Those were all clues to the police that the two of them might have been involved in a conspiracy to murder her husband.
At the very least, Michelle clearly knew something was going to happen on the morning of the 5th.
On July 4th, 2004, at 6:33 p.m., Scott Harper sent her an email that reads, "I'm ready for tomorrow. Stop me if you have any hesitations."
Michelle's reply?
"No hesitations. I'm ready. I can't wait to be your bride."
Was Michelle an accessory to the murder? Or did her involvement go deeper? Scott Harper knew the answer.
We hoped all along Scott would crack and give us the information to tie her to the conspiracy.
And the police had more than enough to charge Scott with murder.
He left plenty of trails, plenty of evidence, and, it begins to unravel fairly quickly.
Police didn't even have to track Scott down to place him under arrest. On the morning of July 8th, just hours after police had uncovered the extent of his affair with Michelle, Scott Harper turned himself in.
He is charged with murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, aggravated battery.
But if the authorities hoped Scott would implicate Michelle, they underestimated the strength of his feelings for her.
He invoked his right to remain silent upon his arrest and did not make another statement to the police.
But they didn't need Scott's statement to have Michelle arrested for murder, now that they had her own words to use against her.
The affair, once they found that out, they pretty quickly decided that they would charge her as well.
At 10 o'clock Thursday morning, barely an hour after Scott turned himself in, Floyd County Police placed Michelle Reynolds in custody.
My sister-in-law said, "They're arresting Michelle right now." And I was like, "Why?" And she said, "Well, she played a part in Thad's murder."
Michelle Reynolds was arrested as she was coming out of her attorney's office in downtown Rome.
Like Scott, she refused to talk.
She invoked her rights, and so a statement was never taken from her.
Michelle wasn't the only one left speechless either.
It was right before the funeral, and I didn't know anything about it. Totally shocked. Totally.
I had no clue up to that point. I thought at all times our marriage was great. Everything seemed wonderful at home. Thought Thad and Michelle's marriage was great. Everybody seemed happy.
Friends that they interacted with at Hollywood Baptist, they didn't dream that the family pastor was having an affair with a deacon's wife.
And that Michelle and Scott would actually conspire to commit murder? That was absolutely unthinkable.
The godly man he was, there's no way that he could have been the one that done it.
The evidence said otherwise. On July 13th, police received a call from one of Scott's co-workers at Floyd County Medical Center.
The police had not found anything during their searches. but he just felt like there must be something there, and he took it upon himself to begin looking in areas where the police might not have gone.
And the coworker had focused his search on the IT department's data center.
Your modern data center has raised tiles on the floor.
You use a suction cup to pick up the tile out of the floor, and that's where all the wires and cables and all that sort of thing run underneath the floor. And it's so that workers can get under there and fix things.
Or hide things.
The knife was there also, along with some bloody clothes.
Coming up, the prosecutors lean hard on Scott Harper.
To seek the death penalty was not terribly surprising to me.
But will Scott betray Michelle?
He could save Michelle while betraying her at the same time.
November 17th, 2004. 4 months after her husband Thad had been found dead, Michelle Reynolds walked into a Floyd County courtroom. She and Thad's best friend Scott Harper had both been charged with murder. But Michelle hadn't come to court that morning to stand trial. Instead, it was a preliminary hearing to determine who would be tried first.
The state gets to elect by law which defendant they're going to try first. And we had elected to try her first.
It was a calculated risk.
The case against her was obviously the weaker case.
She wasn't the actual murderer, the person who killed Thad Reynolds.
She hadn't wielded the knife, at least. Prosecutors conceded that much, but they did hold her ultimately responsible.
She was the person that essentially made it happen. Even though Scotty Harper had the knife in his hands, the district attorney seemed to think that he was following orders from Michelle Reynolds.
But how had she given the order? The emails between the lovers didn't say, but Scott Harper could, if he would cooperate.
We hoped to have his testimony to implicate Michelle.
And when Scott appeared in court that same day for his hearing, it was clear that prosecutors had plenty of leverage.
The case against Scotty was pretty much of a lock. I mean, they really didn't need much.
And in the weeks since finding a bloody knife hidden at Scott's workplace, the evidence had continued to pile up.
They had video from a local Kmart where Scott had gone in and bought a hunting knife, a large hunting knife.
A check with Scott's optometrist also tied him to the eyeglasses found at the crime scene.
The prescription, the way the bridge is measured across his nose, everything about them are exactly like the kind that Scott Harper ordered.
And if that wasn't enough to convince Scott to cut a deal, prosecutors had one last piece of leverage. A month before the November hearing, the DA announced that she would seek the death penalty against both Scott and Michelle.
And the death of a fine young man, a father of 4, to seek the death penalty was not terribly surprising to me.
Now, all the prosecutors had to do was wait, and they didn't expect to wait long.
He was weak. A strong person would have been able to withstand her and all her charms. A strong person would have said, this is wrong.
But did prosecutors underestimate the hold Michelle had over Scott Harper?
I had begged Scotty to do what needed to be done and tell his part of the story about Michelle's involvement, his involvement, many times. And he would always just tell me, no, just leave her out of this.
Scotty Harper was smitten and just head over heels in love with Michelle Reynolds.
According to the prosecutors, Michelle had played upon that infatuation to facilitate her husband's murder.
I think she could have cared less about him. All he was the muscle.
And prosecutors were just as convinced that the manipulation continued once they were both in jail, held without bond.
Within weeks of being arrested, they were writing each other in jail.
In one of the letters, she writes a series of Bible verses down. And in each one of the Bible verses, she underlines one word. If you take all of the underlined words and string them together, it makes this sentence. All I knew was that you were going to speak to him about us. Help me.
Between the prosecutor's attempt to sweat a statement out of Scott and the delay inherent in a death penalty case, the legal maneuvering dragged on for months and then years. And the more time passed, the more Scott dug in, refusing to roll over on Michelle.
Meetings with him resulted in nothing. He just would not come forward. A lot of sheepish, head hanging kind of things, but nothing that we could use.
It wasn't until the fall of 2008, after 4 years in jail, that Scott was finally ready to cooperate.
He held out for much longer than we would have thought he would.
And when his attorneys presented details of Scott's offer to the prosecutors, his concern for Michelle remained front and center. He'd plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence, but on one condition.
The condition of his statement would be that we take the death penalty off the table for Michelle.
Even at that point, he was still trying to save her.
However, Scott did agree to testify at Michelle's trial.
He could save Michelle while, one could say betraying her at the same time.
The prosecutors approved the deal, and on October 1st, 2008, bailiffs led Scott Harper into a Floyd County courtroom.
I was surprised that the district attorney agreed to it, but again, he was the key to the case.
While we could have tried her, our case was not nearly as strong as it would have been with his testimony.
The plea entered. Scott sat down with prosecutors and gave them his account of Thad's death.
He still loved her. He told us that he did. And he was going to do everything in his power to minimize her involvement.
In the statement he gave, she never says, Scott, go murder Thad.
But had she made her intentions clear?
Michelle pretty much said that Thad would not leave easily, that he would fight for her, and that it could get ugly.
He told her, I can deal with ugly.
According to Scott, it was only after that conversation that he'd gone to Kmart.
Once he bought that knife, that was on Thursday evening. Then Friday, he actually had lunch with Michelle Reynolds. She came and picked him up at the hospital.
Scott said they had driven out to the levee, parking like a pair of teenagers.
They got into the back seat and started kissing. And while they were engaging in this behavior, Michelle put the question to Scott Harper, have you talked to Thad yet? And Scott Harper said, no, I haven't been able to yet. And immediately, she withdrew from him. She became cold, distant.
Scott said he was afraid of losing her. So 4 days later, he'd gotten up before dawn and driven to Frito-Lay.
As he came in, Thad looked up and looked at him and said, Scotty Harper, what are you doing here? And Scott Harper says he looked at him and said, I want what you've got.
But had the prosecutors gotten what they wanted?
The statement he gave was not a definitive statement of Michelle's guilt. If she was charged with adultery, it would be definitive. But with murder, no.
Other than entering a not guilty plea when the murder charges were filed, Michelle had never given the authorities a statement. So as the prosecutors prepped for her trial, they were well aware of the risk of relying on Scott's less than definitive statement.
All that had to happen is for one person on that jury to say, well, maybe she really did think that he was just going to talk to him.
On January 13th, 2010, Michelle Reynolds was back in a Rome, Georgia courtroom. Awaiting trial for the stabbing death of her husband, Thad, she had spent the past 6 years in jail.
I don't know if she stayed in the county jail there in Rome longer than anybody they've ever had or not, but she certainly was there a long time. She gained a good bit of weight while she was there.
Nearly 2 years earlier, Scott Harper, Thad's best friend and Michelle's lover, had pled guilty to the murder and agreed to testify against her.
I wanted to hear what Scotty Harper would say on the stand, looking Michelle Reynolds in the face. It would have been a very riveting moment in the courtroom.
Even though it might have been difficult to hear, it might have been some sort of closure.
It would never happen. Rather than face Scott in court, Michelle stood up before the judge that morning and pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter.
And how do you plead the charges, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Getting Scott Harper's statement was like pulling teeth, but we got it. And she never thought we'd get it. and that's why she pled.
She felt responsible in a way for this death because of the affair. And I think because of that, she felt like she should plead to something.
That morning at the sentencing, Thad's mother asked her former daughter-in-law point blank why her son had to die.
Your Honor, I only have one question, and that would be why? Why not just walk away?
There was no response. Her eyes were just cold. No remorse, no feelings, nothing.
She knew that Thad would not let her take the kids away from him. So she thought that, that was the only way, was to get him out of the picture so she could have the kids.
Thad was out of the picture, but the kids would be considerably older before she got out of prison. The judge sentenced her to 20 years.
She gets credit for all of that time that she's been in. Hopefully she'll be out 4 years, 5 years.
Scott Harper, whose plea arrangement had delayed his sentencing until after Michelle's, received a life sentence without parole.
Talking to some folks after Michelle's guilty plea and the sentence she received, they don't feel like justice was done.
I would have liked to see Michelle get a lot more. I would have liked to actually see her life in prison.
Scott may have wielded the knife, but for many people in Rome, Georgia, Michelle remains the real villain.
He was just weak, just very, very weak. And I think Satan just saw a crack and stepped in.
We're in the Bible Belt. I think a lot of people believe that Scotty was just manipulated by her and that she was the devil incarnate.
Those were the two closest people in my life other than my children. And I never expected it. It makes you question, do you ever really know anyone?
Two perfect couples.
They did family vacations. They would go camping.
We'd go to Six Flags or we'd go out to eat.
But a devastating crime would tear the four friends apart.
To see all the blood and the evidence left behind, you knew right then there'd been a fight, a pretty good scuffle that went on.
The resulting investigation would send the congregation reeling.
Most of them had absolutely no idea there was an affair going on.
And the search for answers would leave police wondering just how many commandments did one person violate. Early morning, July 5th, 2004. It was still dark when a delivery driver pulled into the parking lot at the Frito-Lay distribution center in Rome, Georgia.
He's fixing to come load his Frito-Lay truck to go on his route.
While he's in the parking lot, I think he's just getting some stuff together before he gets out of the car, he sees a man step out of the office.
Someone at the office that early in the morning wasn't unusual, but the fact that the driver didn't recognize the man was.
It was not really a facility that was open to the public. It was just where the drivers came and loaded and unloaded product.
Even more suspicious, the stranger silhouetted in the doorway appeared nervous.
That man stops, looks around, stands there for just a few seconds.
Whether he'd noticed the delivery man sitting in his parked car or not, the stranger made a hasty exit.
The witness watches the guy walk over to this burgundy minivan, and he opens the car door, and when he does, the light comes on inside the van, and then he watches the guy take his shirt off and pull it over his head.
Once he'd stripped off his shirt, the stranger started the minivan and drove away, leaving the witness to wonder what was going on inside the Frito-Lay office.
He went and checked the office and discovered the victim in this case.
It was the distribution center's district manager, Thad Reynolds, slumped on the floor in a pool of blood.
His supervisor has been attacked and he calls 911.
Police and EMTs were on the scene within minutes, but it was no use. Thad Reynolds was already dead.
There were 19 different stab wounds.
To see all the blood and the evidence left behind, you knew right then that there'd been a fight, a pretty good scuffle that went on.
Thad's death sent shockwaves through the close-knit southern community, particularly his church, Hollywood Baptist.
This church in particular was a very larger church in a smaller community. A lot of people here, everybody knows everybody.
And everybody at Hollywood Baptist knew Thad Reynolds and his wife, Michelle.
Thad and Michelle, just looking at them, they were the perfect couple.
She was the beautiful blonde mother of 4.
She was just a very likable, very pretty person.
He was a dedicated father and a devout Christian.
He loved the Lord and could, you know, always make your day better.
People that were not doing well or they needed guidance, he would be there.
We lost one of the godliest men you could ever want to meet.
Thad's murder was bad enough, but the parishioners at Hollywood Baptist would receive another blow when they discovered the sin that led to it. As small-town Georgia teenagers in the 1980s, Michelle Sullins and Thad Reynolds were the quintessential high school sweethearts.
Michelle was very popular in high school. She was the homecoming queen.
He was popular, played football, was into sports.
They married in 1987, just after graduation.
He went to work for Curtis Meat. He drove a truck.
Michelle got a job working as an administrative assistant, but gave it up when she gave birth to a daughter in 1992.
When she started having children, they had made the decision that she would be a stay-at-home mom.
But just as Thad and Michelle's small-town romance appeared on the fast track to a happy ending, things suddenly derailed. In 1995, after almost 7 years of marriage, Michelle told Thad she wanted a divorce.
She wasn't happy just being a mom and a wife.
She made the comment to this pastor from the church, "You place your wife on a pedestal, but Thad never put me on a pedestal."
Thad agreed to the divorce, but he immediately regretted it, especially for the effect it might have on his daughter.
He was never more miserable in his life. He didn't believe in divorce. He did not believe in broken homes.
Determined to get Michelle back, Thad Reynolds turned to the church he'd attended since childhood, Hollywood Baptist.
It was a very close-knit congregation, a community of people that took their faith and religion very seriously.
Thad asked the members of the church to pray for him and Michelle Reynolds to get back together.
You had several people praying that they get back together because he just wanted her back so bad.
Whether it was the prayers or Thad's persistent courtship, Michelle eventually had a change of heart. 2 years after they had divorced, the couple remarried in 1997.
Thad and Michelle had a wedding in the church on a Sunday morning. Was our church ceremony.
And this time it looked like the marriage would last. The couple built a new home and quickly filled it.
Everything was going good.